Everyone, I would like to welcome everyone to the Clearlake City Council Chambers located at 14050 Olympic Drive in Clearlake, California. Today is Wednesday, June 7th, 2023. This is a special meeting of the Clearlake City Council at 3 p.m. We'll be following the normal means and procedures for this meeting. We are also Zoom capable for those who weren't able to physically make this meeting, and all of that information to log into the Zoom meeting is online. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Kramer.
Here.
Councilmember Overton.
Here.
Councilmember Slotin.
Here.
Vice Mayor Claffey.
Here.
Mayor Purdock.
Here. Vice Mayor, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all very much. Purpose of this meeting is to have a public hearing to consider the appeal of the Planning Commission's decision of April 25. This was postponed due to a request from the Khoi tribal members for religious purposes. Mr. Flora, would you like to open?
Sure, Mr. Mayor, council members. So I will I'll give a very brief overview and then we'll turn over some other folks. But I'll give a little bit of a brief history on just how we got here. We do have.
Is your mic on, sir?
Oh, yeah, I believe so. Do I need to be closer? We also have an errata that was prepared by our legal team that we'll distribute here shortly. This is to the MND, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. White to give an overview of his report, and then the appellant will have opportunity to give a presentation. Normally we allow 20 minutes. I guess they've requested 30, so that would be your discretion. Public comment, then city response, and then the appellant will get a rebuttal of 5 minutes is the way we normally handle it. So and then council deliberations from there. So unless there's any questions on process, I'll just give my overview.
Thank you, sir. Please continue.
Okay, so this project started I guess late part of 2020, in the sense that in December, the city purchased this property. Shortly after that, I received a call from Vice Chair Beltran about some local knowledge related to possibly burial site there. And as has been our practice for the last few years, and in particular with that information, we immediately contracted with Dr. White to begin his work, which started in January of 2021. And then that included his consultation with the Khoi field investigation with Khoi tribal members happened over several days in February of 2021. And then in early April, Dr. White issued a technical memo. And the purpose of this was just so we needed to kind of understand the situation on the ground so that we could kind of begin the design process and adjust our design early based on any findings from Dr. White, which of course he identified in this case a couple of sites that we needed to avoid. So let's see. And then basically the design process happened over the next year, and in February of 2022, Dr. White issued his initial report to us. In March, then we initiated actual AB 52 consultation with the Khoi, and then continue forward with the project, the environmental review. In August, we had a meeting with the tribe before the initial planning commission hearing that included the mayor at the time, and we agreed to extend the comment period on the mitigated negative declaration. And then September 27th of 2022 was the first planning commission hearing. At that time, the planning commission heard information and made the determination that staff and some various other representatives should have additional consultation with the tribe about the project. And so we met twice, October 12th and October 20th. That also included Mayor Slotin at the time and the chair of the planning commission, Ms. Wilson. And then there was a lot of back and forth after that on various things, but we were not able to come to an agreement. So in March 21st, 2023, the city sent a letter formally ending consultation without agreement and scheduled the planning commission hearing on April 25th, where the planning commission unanimously approved the project. And then the appeal was filed. As you know, it was scheduled for June 1st hearing and then continued to this afternoon. So I think that's the overview I wanted to give now, and I think I will pass out the errata while Dr. White is giving an overview of his report.
Thank you, Mr. Flora. Dr. White.
It's right in January 2021, I was contracted by the city of Clearlake to complete a local resource investigation of the project to meet requirements under the California Environmental Quality Act. And that act requires a thorough investigation to determine what's called inventory. That is the nature, location, and extent of cultural resources contained on the subject parcel. I was out there in February. I had contacted the Koi Nation that January, immediately on being contracted with by the city, and began open discussions with them and made arrangements with Koi Nation to get their approval on methods that I plan to apply. And then two Koi Nation representatives accompanied me during my investigation, which spanned 2 full days. That investigation included both a conventional intensive pedestrian walkthrough of the project area, which is what you'll see most archaeologists do, walk the surface. But I was concerned because in my research in advance of the project, I found that the parcel is located in what was the upper watershed of Miller Creek. That watershed is sort of a relic watershed now. There's a relic channel that runs through the parcel that was extinguished when the Burns Valley Mall was completed. But I realized that some prior management of that watershed had taken place at the time that the mall was built. They redirected the channel into a pipeline that runs through basically underneath the parking lot and on out to connect to the old channel. And then at the head of that, there's a big stormwater retention basin that exists on the parcel. So there had been a stream out there. Now that stream was originally carried a lot of stormwater. The reason they built that basin is that stream originally carried a lot of stormwater in big rain days. It still does. And stormwater creates floods, and floods pack sediment. And so that entire floodplain had been buried a number of times by flood deposited silt. That means that as an archaeologist, when I walk over these floodplains, I'm looking at silt and sediment deposits that are less than 100 years old. I'm looking at stuff less than 100 years old. Soil itself is that I can see when I walk across the surface is less than 100 years old, meaning that the archaeology, which can be 10, 12, 14,000 years old, is all underneath me in places I can't see. So I worked with the city to find out the potential extent of the impacts that might result from the development of the parcel, and then designed a testing program that would reach those maximum depths. And I ended up digging 38 trench probes using City of Clearlake equipment and operator, each 8 feet long and 8 to 12 feet deep, reaching as almost in some cases as deep as the extended probe could reach, to try to look for buried archaeological deposits. In other words, get through the thousands of years of sediment to see if that floodplain had been occupied in the past. And so there were two different findings out there that I need to speak to. One is that the prior owner of that parcel had kind of abandoned the agricultural function of that parcel in the 1970s. You may be familiar with how dilapidated that walnut orchard was, and in place of that agricultural economy, that individual started accepting, probably being paid to accept surplus materials excavated from other locations around the lake, including a big pile right behind the shopping center of material that resulted from the demolition of homes and the bulldozing of material that existed in the area of the present day Burns Valley Shopping Center that had been piled on that land. I also found older transported materials, gravel that was harvested from the gravel mining operations on Ogulin Canyon Road, very distinctive looking rock that you get out of there, that was used as underlayment for a barn and a corral. And then the third was a big strip, 1,000 feet long and over 150 feet wide, 1,000 feet long, that ran down the middle of that orchard, that looked to me to be a material derived from the construction of Pomo School over there on Sonoma Avenue. And when they laid in Pomo School, they dug out the obsidian and all of the volcanic ash from that area, and it looks like that was dumped on that parcel as well in a big strip. So in each of those cases, the 1940s fill derived from Ogulin Canyon gravel, the material derived from bulldozing and demolition in the vicinity of the Burns Valley Mall that was probably in place about 1975 or 6 when that was built, and then the Pomo School, which I believe was built about 1995 or 1996. There was obsidian in there, but the obsidian rested on those floodplain deposits, those transported demolition and foreign fill materials were transported and laid in on top of the floodplain deposits. And when I probed with the backhoe next to those, in each case under the 1940s barn, in and around the materials transported elsewhere, the obsidian contained in those foreign fills was confined to the foreign fills, and then once I got below it, I found nothing. So I was confident that the obsidian that I saw in those contexts was transported to that location. It did not belong there. Now, it wasn't originally deposited there, but it's not to say that there aren't cultural materials in that foreign fill. There are indeed. But when I do this work, I'm constrained under CEQA, under California Environmental Quality Act, to evaluate these resources under CEQA regulation, which means the first threshold that I have to look at when I'm looking at significance is whether these resources have integrity of location, integrity of context. In other words, when the police collect evidence on a crime scene, they don't want you going in there and picking up stuff and moving it around and bringing in stuff from elsewhere. They want to see that context undisturbed. And an archaeologist has the same need when they evaluate evidence. I can't look at things that are transported from miles away. Sometimes I don't know from where, and make any sense out of it or find any meaning. It's not significance under. So if it lacks integrity, it does not qualify as a historical resource under California law. And those are the legal constraints on the way I look at the record. Now, the second thing, that's all of that was about the surface and But the second part of my findings had to do with buried cultural resources. In two different locations, when we probed down, we identified intact cultural deposits. They're quite distinct. I mean, in both cases, they were capped by sand and gravel up to about 3 to 4 feet deep. In other words, flood deposited silts and sands that had come in and that the stream channel had overflowed and laid in these things on top of an old soil. And when you get down to that old soil, you see dark loam, just like you do on regular soil that's been exposed for a long time. Those soils developed with organic materials deposited by trees and vegetation growing on a stable land surface. Now, the way to think about this is that every time the land surface stabilizes, the earth grows a new skin. And that skin is composed of the exchange of organic materials from whatever grows on it and with the inorganic underlayment. And then whenever a flood happens, an entirely new inorganic underlayment comes in and buries that, and the soil building process starts again. In some places, I've seen as many as 3 or 4 soils stacked, the deepest one being 7,000 or 8,000 years old, the middle one 3 or 4, and the top one being the modern one right now. So this is what an archaeologist looks for. This is what I look for when I was out there. And the reason that I dug those trenches to make sure that when construction happens, that the city didn't have any surprises and that we were as thorough as possible. And they were, I think above and beyond. The density of trenches that I dug out there is as dense as I've done on any project, even big Fed projects where there's a lot of money involved. I wanted to make sure that these issues were addressed. Now, I found those subsurface resources in 2 locations. The way we dug them, by the way, was we would come down and then we'd see that soil change. And they were, I worked with Tyler Beach to just go a little bit at a time. And as soon as we saw that soil change, we'd pull up. We'd identify, Rob was out there, he'll remember. We identified that and we stopped. And we defined the sites, the general location based on the grid work of like a waffle style grid work of probes that I dug. And then in order to further define the area occupied by the sites, we come in from the side and find the perimeters on all sides, which we did. And I was very confident that what I was seeing out there were 2 distinct buried deposits that probably date about 3,000 to 5,000 years old. In other words, they were occupied beginning around 5,000 years ago and then buried by subsequent floodplain action and were no longer visible on the surface. But there was a lot of obsidian on the surface that I could demonstrate was contained in the foreign fill materials dropped on the parcel in the modern era by those three events that I described. I worked subsequently with the tribe, supplied them with my report, and discussed these issues several times personally and in the context of these meetings. I stand by those findings, and I have been working with the city to identify protective measures for those sites, and encouraging the city to reach agreement with the tribe on what the nature and extent of those protection measures since those events. My final report, I'd have to say that, by the way, my first report was a technical memo. The city didn't have any construction plans back in my initial report. I called it a technical memorandum rather than a full-scale report. And it was simply a report on the trenching and the locations of things that I identified. The subsequent report, which I issued in August 28th, 2022, August 28th, 2022, was the full-scale report embodying my entire research program, which included a historical analysis to try to identify the sources of those foreign fills and a full-scale document review and so on. So there is possible that the tribe saw that initial technical memo And then, but I did make sure that you had copies of the final. That's what you have in front of you now. But I just wanted to point out that that initial technical memo has some shortcomings in terms of its overall, the overall body of research. But since the city didn't have a full a development plan, it was the purpose of that initial technical memo was just to say, hey, look, these things are here. This is what we need to avoid. So when you're planning, here's how to proceed. And then once they reach 60%, then I could issue a design plan, then I could issue the formal report. So that takes us up to the end of my initial involvement.
Thank you very much for your
My
report.
pleasure.
Any council member have a question of staff at this point? Mr. Floor, do you have anything to add at this point? If I might, sir, at about what, I forget, about what level did you begin to see
Yeah.
the change in soil color?
If I recall correctly, it's around 18 to 24 inches. It varies a little bit. But it's quite a clear break. And you may have seen these kinds of breaks before where you go through a bunch of gravel and then all of a sudden there's a brown loam. And what you're looking at is the buried soil. That's what I see when I see those things. So it's quite a clear break, and it was discrete to a very specific area. I think in both cases, I dug as many as 6 to 8 trenches impinging. You want to come in like the spokes on a wheel and come in from the side. And when you find something, you don't want to dig into this thing with it. I mean, you don't want to damage the resource, but as soon as you come down, if you work with a careful operator and have them that just peel off a little bit at a time, then it's possible to see it, stop it as soon as we see it, and then move on.
Thank you. How would you characterize the city operator that you were working with?
That
Was
was
he
Tyler
careful?
Beats there in the city of Clearlake. Yeah, I like Tyler. He's good.
Were there any other witnesses there with you while you were exploring that area?
Yeah, Rob Morgan was there and Yolanda Chavez was there.
Very good. Any other questions from council?
But it's Sanchez, I'm sorry.
All right.
My apologies. You're gonna get mad at me later for that. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer.
Can you give us some idea in general terms, if nothing else, or what?
Speak into your mic and turn your mic on.
Mike is on, I'm not close enough. Any idea in general what those cultural resources were? The obsidian scattered with.
Yeah, and by the way, I didn't connect the dots there all the way around. Part of my job, once I identified two historical resources, I also had to evaluate whether they were significant. And I concluded that they were significant and merited protection under California law to the fullest extent. They contained obsidian artifacts. What's important about the site, what makes it significant from a scientific standpoint, is that it's a bracketed time period. And I think the most profound example of that we're all familiar with is like Pompeii. You know, Pompeii doesn't have, you know, World War II debris, you know, and then McDonald's wrappers stacked up on top of it to mix up, and it's a discrete time frame where you can see the operation of one culture in its context, in a distinct environment, in a distinct bracketed time frame. And that's what makes these sites really important, is that they're both quite specific to a particular period of time, and then they were sealed.
And again, the shallowest that one of those sites showed up was 18 inches.
18 to 24 below surface.
And then how far did they extend down? I'm curious.
I did not probe that because
It's
part of my agreement with the tribe, my practice with the tribe, to ensure that these resources aren't damaged, is to stop when you find. And that's really the purpose. And my guess is that here's the thing. Miller Creek was a hell of a floodplain, and you know, before it was developed and cut off. And there were massive floodplain deposits laid in out there. My guess is that there would just be stacks of floodplains going down 20, 30, 40, 50 feet. Each one of them may have a distinct soil. And if I went deeper than that, I could find a completely different arrangement of size.
Any idea of the age of that first site?
3 to 5,000.
3 to 5,000 years. Okay.
Any other questions of staff? Very well. At this time, I would like to open it up to the coordination. Ms. Robinson, do you have someone who's presenting or will you be presenting?
Yes, we're going to start. First of all, thank you for the continuing, we appreciate it.
Thank you. If you could please come forward. Absolutely. We would like to hear your appeal. Sir, if you could step up to the microphone and introduce yourself. Thank you, Mr. Beltran. We need to let everybody know if they're watching who you are and why you're here.
Thank you, sir. My name is Darren Beltran. I'm tribal chairman at the Coin Nation in Northern California. I want to thank council today for to listen to us and what we had to say and what we have. But what I want to do is relinquish my time to my council and to Mr. Geary, if that's fine.
Of course, sir.
Thank you very much.
Gary.
Hekate mai ufkate kentil weekend Robert Gary Yahake Limbuk Yahake Atawa Kit Koi Nation Yahake Habimato Homo Upper Lake. How are all of you today? My name is Robert Gary. I'm a citizen of Alem, but I work for Habimato and Koi Nation Cultural Resource Department. First of all, I just wanted to thank you, for giving me the opportunity today and listen to Dr. White's report. And giving me an opportunity to respond to that. My name is Robert Gary. Like I said before, I'm the Director of Cultural Resources. I'm also the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. I'm also a cultural practitioner, for the Olympic colony from where I'm from, one of them. I'm also a member of the Tribal Historic Preservation Office of Organization of California. I also am a member of the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. I also sit on the Lake County Cannabis Ordinance Task Force Committee to create policy for permitting for cannabis cultivation projects in Lake County. I'm a Southeastern Pomo language teacher, putting together the very first Southeastern Pomo dictionary in Lake County. I'm also one of the recipients for the Cal TIPO organization that was given the Cultural Resource Management of the Year for 2020 from the Society for California Archaeology. And I'm also a cultural curation advisor for the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art, the San Francisco DeYoung Museum, the Grace Hudson Museum. I'm also working with San Francisco Opera. I've done interviews with NBC News for Native California, San Jose Mercury News, LA Times, Native News Online, Capital News Radio. I've done presentations and trainings for Department of Water Resources, Lake County Office of Education, Lake County Planning Commissioners and Planners, Lake County Office, Sheriff's Office. I've also presented at the Judges Breakfast on Cultural Resources, Department of Transportation, Society for California Archaeology. Did also cultural sensitivity training and presentations for UC Berkeley, Stanford, UC Davis, and Purdue. So I'm here today to just basically talk about the tribe and the history of the tribe in the territory, especially for the project site. The Khoi people have been here from time immemorial. Their footprint and their history lies in the soil that is around us today. They range all around here in Lake County, into Mendocino County, down into Sonoma County, the Pomo Nations, very different from coastal, lake, and valley. I'm here to talk to the city today, and we are happy with the progress that the city has made. I think with going forward with projects and certain projects on how things are being processed today. We think that there's still progress that has to be made. I think with the protocols and processes for permitting and understanding CEQA with consultation with tribes, meaningful consultation with tribes, and also to establish good mitigation measures that both sides feel comfortable with. We have provided in consultation substantial evidence of the cultural resources or tribal cultural resources that are going to be impacted or can be impacted. A lot of these resources are stated in a lot of the different archaeological surveys, archaeological reports, not only by Dr. White himself, but a lot of the citations that he actually quotes in his archaeological surveys that he submits for approval. In there, they talk about the tribe, the Khoi Nation's Aboriginal territory, and where it's actually located. Where the project site is actually in Khoi Nation's Aboriginal territory, not anyone else's. We did consult on this. We asked to consult. We brought new information in our process as far as making sure when we get to consultation, we take not only the tribal cultural knowledge, but we also take scientific knowledge and scientific data. And we compile all that together to make a good determination on when we get to the consultation table. Every consultation that we attend, we not only bring and take a look at the archaeological study that's been done, but we also bring any kind of information that the tribe may have that the city might not, and establish a better determination for what happens for a project and when it should be approved. One of the things I wanted to respond to, I think, was Dr. White's talking about, some of the history, I think, with the site location. We heard that, and this is the practice that we're trying to change, I think, with the city of Clearlake, is taking culturally sensitive soils and relocating them into areas and not having a history of that. We're talking about tribal cultural resources that are laying on top, that we're hearing that come from other areas and other locations that are not being evaluated, that are not being reported or not being noted. And so we're in a situation of where we're at. So according to that, I think that's something that we hope that we can work together to be able to establish a good process to follow, and making sure that, the process that's set into place that we feel comfortable with, that we're not having to worry about culturally sensitive soils being replaced. Hence the splash pad project. Here we had redeposited soil that were being told in consultation that we weren't going to hit anything below 18 inches, almost similar to exactly the process that we're being told for this project. On the very first day, we hit 1,800 or 1,500 pieces. Not knowing where that soil came from, not knowing what was all in it, we were being told that we didn't have anything to worry about. We were still worried. And so what came to fruition in consultation happened. And so here we are today, and we have the same concerns. We're talking about redeposited soil historically from different places that no one has records for where they came from. We don't know what archaeological site. We don't know if they have human remains. We don't know what type of tribal cultural resources are in them, but we know they're there. The reason why we know we're there, because we actually had a survey done by Dr. Parker. So with the survey that was done by Dr. Parker, which was done on 9/27/22, I believe, which was submitted. In it, he has 3 highly density scattered obsidian areas. He also has stone tools, including broken trade blanks, bifaces, flake scrapers, and hammerstone. These are all found on top. And, we just went through an issue, I think, with the disking. So this isn't even breaking the surface. This is what's being found on top. There was one Copsey bipoint, which is an arrowhead that is also known to be as old as 4,000 years old. Also an Excelsior type 4 arrowhead point, which is also identified dating between 1,200 and 2,000 years old. This was found on a pedestrian survey on the project site. And these are the concerns that the tribe's having with the project site area. And these are the concerns of why we feel that there needs to be a more in-depth look at the impacts that can be potentially happening to the tribe's cultural resources that are there. With that said, also on Dr. White's investigation, found 2 new sites that weren't reported. These also have the potential to be significant enough to be on the Federal Register. He points that out. There was also additional reports that have been found for other projects that were certain on certain areas of the project at the end of the project area. So we know now that there's not only tribal cultural resources in the area where we're saying that there's a buffer zone and we should only be concerned about, we know that there's cultural resources outside of that area. And all the tribe is asking is to make sure that we can be there. And we're not stopping the project, but we can be there to protect, because if we're not there, no one is there to tell the operator to stop. No one is there to tell the foreman to stop or anything else. Just like Dr. White said, once a cultural resource is destroyed, that's it. We don't get that back. That's a part of history. That's a part of the tribe's history that is no longer coming back. And so I think that's one of the things that we're discussing about today. You know, what kind of processes are we having? We've heard Dr. White's report about, like I said, the moving of soils from one place to another multiple times over years. After that, we've actually had a survey done where we're finding things on the top. So with Dr. White's report, we found everything below. We're talking about an area below where he's found something that's significant. On the pedestrian survey, we find things up on top. Why would we not think that there's going to be anything in the middle? And I think these are the questions that we don't know. So for us to be able to mitigate this and get this project to go forward, the tribe feels comfortable with just making sure that we have a monitor on there. So when those things pop up, we have the potential to save that. And I think that's why we're here today. Our tribal nations here in Lake County are a part of this. And I employ and I'm asking to make sure that, you know, there's inclusion here for us. I look all around here and I see people of different nations and different colors. I look through the city and I go to this city and I don't see anything that includes me. I don't see a name. I don't see a location. I don't see anything that represents me. And that's all I'm asking as far as us as the tribal nations is inclusion. Show inclusion. We bring to the table knowledge, not only scientific knowledge, but cultural knowledge. We share that. This is something that when an archaeological report is done, this archaeological report is paid for. The knowledge that I bring to the consultation table, tribal cultural knowledge, is free. That knowledge is combined with all of the scientific data that your archaeological firm will have on paper. I'll coincide that with everything that we get from Sonoma State. We have a detailed process of what we look at. We use mapping. We use LiDAR, different types of formats to be able to look at ground locations and indentations in the ground to see house pits. Everything that we do, we bring to the table, and it's for free. It's not a charge. I don't get paid for that. I get paid to come and to bring my information to the city and show the concerns that we have. And hopefully we can create a mitigation measure that will be effective to make sure that we don't lose that footprint. And that's what I do with every consultation. Every consultation that we have, that's what happens. And so we're hoping to make sure that that happens here. Like I said, due to the history of what's been going on, we have the 18th Avenue, we have the Austin Park, where we've had sensitive soils that are being distributed in many different places. We're saying we can't create more archaeological sites. That's what we're doing. When we are taking sensitive soils and placing them into other areas, we're creating new sites. And this area is already sensitive. And sometimes we're hearing that the tribe definitely wants to make sure that they want to monitor everything. This is not true. We actually have projects both with the city and the county in the area, Koi Nation, on projects that we're not monitoring on. We just did an agreement with the old Highway 53 drainage project as one of them. We also did the Bush Street, the 36th Avenue sewer line project. We only spot checked. We didn't need a monitor out there. And that was with the Clearlake Division of Inland Development Company. The Dam Road Extension Project, there's no monitor out there. We just told them we wanted an opportunity to train the equipment operators out there on what to look for. And if something pops up, who to contact when that happens. The Old Away Highway 53 drainage project. We don't have a monitor out there. Same thing. All we wanted to do was train because there was nothing that was within the area. The Tolan project from the planning department, same thing. Just training and making sure that we got an opportunity to let them know what the process is. So as far as the slippery slope that we're having of saying the tribe only wants to be out there and monitor everything is not true. There's projects that we have not monitored. But due to the sensitivity of the area, not only by our department, but also by yours. And the reason why I say that is because the archaeologist found a site, which I believe is one big site, that has the potential and significance for being on the Federal Register. And he states that. So everything that I think that has come to here today is definitely something to warrant, because the tribe will be at every consultation table at every time. In the territory that you're in Koine Nation territory. We talk about Burns Valley Creek. In our language, it's called Kulbadai. There's a misconception and understanding exactly what the tribal cultural traditions are. And when you're reading it from an archaeological standpoint, it's not accurate. It's their perspective. And if you want to get what that comes from us, ask us. And that's what's not being answered or asked. Tribal tracks. I think you have the maps in front of you. We're unique. The Southeastern Pomo were the only tribes that had this system set into place. And you can see how inundated it was with those tracks. Each track was lineal. It belonged to a family. So where we were at here was a track. Dr. White can attest to this. There's also been a report on this from Gifford. I'm talking about the tracks of the Southeastern Pomo. Southeastern Pomo tracks was a track that basically was filled with cultural resources that family used, not only to sustain their family, but also to trade with tracks and neighboring tribes for things that they didn't have. This was a system that's set here. And unfortunately, in the city of Clearlake, all of it are divided into tracks. So you'll see habitation areas along a track in different areas. You'll see tool making areas. You'll see different areas because that whole entire track wasn't necessarily a village. It was a place to go use and extract resources. So maybe upstream, they were there for a while when the hitch ran. Another area was a little bit more inland where all the oak trees were. So you're going to see habitation and you're going to see areas where it shows lithic scatter, basically obsidian from making stone tools and those kind of things happen in all of these different areas because they were utilizing their lineal tracks. And this is something that just happened. This was a system that the Southeastern Pomo, and I take pride in this because we were so detailed. But with that said, I mean, and Dr. White can attest to this, there's 3 new projects that have been asked where we can come in and be a part of the survey to find out information. In his own email, he talks about that these sites are highly sensitive. Guess what? We haven't even gotten to the consultation table and we're already told that. Something that we already know. And there's already a misconception that the tribe wants to just monitor everything. Well, we want to monitor the sensitive sites. We've shown you that there's projects that we have where if it's not that sensitive, we're okay with spot checking. But when they're that sensitive, we want to be there. So if that outlook, I think, on the tribe of wanting to monitor every project that happens, when I get to the consultation table for these 3 projects, what am I going to be looked at when I agree with them? If I agree with him that, yeah, it is sensitive. Yeah, we want to monitor. And this was already predetermined before we get to the consultation table. Is that look at the tribe going to look at us again and kind of go, are you guys just want to monitor? But it's in the record. It's showing it is what it is. There's a system that's set up you cannot find anywhere else. because the southeastern tribes were on islands. Families got bigger. There were places where they went and they had lineal tracts that went off of those islands. And each track gave something back to the people. And those are the things that we're protecting here today. This is why I'm not surprised when we went and we find these things out here at the sports complex. You go up a little bit farther when we actually did a report for the subdivision project. Then we found sites up there that aren't registered. I'm not surprised because it's a tract, a lineal tract that we utilized on a day-to-day basis, season-to-season basis for the sustainability of our families and our community. And that's why it's so sensitive here. And these are the things that we're bringing to the table that aren't in a lot of these reports. This is the knowledge that I'm explaining to a lot of the non-Indigenous people, and hopefully we can get past this and get on to developing these projects, but culturally sensitively. And I think that's what we're trying to establish here today. That's what we're trying to get the city to understand, that it's not a good practice to take sensitive soil and put it somewhere else and think that, you know what, that it's going to be okay. Because you know what, that site eventually is going to be developed. It's going to have to get evaluated. According to CEQA, this is just what happens. And this is the law. And so that's why we're here today, is that we want to establish a good working relationship. It's not wrong because we've already found things on top, out of the buffer zone, that we want to make sure that we have somebody on site to be able to make sure that those aren't destroyed. With the disking that just happened, my worry was, what about the things that we found when we were out there? There's abalone shell that's out there. We're not at the coast. We know how that got here, right? That lets you know, trade system all comes down to exactly where we're at today. And it happened, it's history. And I think that's what we're trying to establish, is to take into consideration. And that's what meaningful consultation is making sure that we can listen and hear each other and come up with a plan to be able to go forward. Because I know the Koine Nation does not want to stop any project. What it wants to do is to protect its footprint and its history that we have left. And like I said, once they're gone, it's gone. And so I know that this city, because I've been here a lifelong, I've been here all my life. I was raised here, born here, raised here. I would bleed blue and white for Lower Lake, right? I played basketball games, baseball games, won championships, and was sitting there talking about Clearlake, bragging that I'm from Clearlake. And I want the city to brag a little bit about us, the Indigenous community, that as a part of that. We're a part of the baseball that happens. We're a part of those teams. We're not just players, the kid teams. I was a coach. I coach football, I coach basketball, I coach baseball. I'm a part of that, but it shouldn't be at the extent of the history of the Indigenous people here. We're world renowned for basketry, the Pomo are, because we had a huge amount of resources that we've never done
We can't close it.
Can't do
for,
this an open meeting, man.
it's a public
no one
hearing.
has done, and we've elevated that.
Sorry about that. sir.
Yeah, no problem. So I think I'm just trying to expand on how important it is. And
Thank
like I
you.
said, the inclusion is to make sure that happens. At one of the last meetings, I had somebody tell me, well, your culture is my culture. And I wish that was true, because, it wouldn't be that much of a fight to try to make that understand. But if that was true, I don't see any of the members when we're naming a newborn, or when we're gathering, or when ceremony happens. That integration hasn't happened yet. And so we're still trying to understand that we're here. We've always been here. Some of you probably went to school with my dad and my mom and other people from my family. We've always been here, and we're going to continue to be here. The only way that we can go forward is to make sure that we establish a good relationship, follow the law. That's what we're asking, is follow the law. What we're bringing and the information that we're bringing to the table is free. No one's paying for that. Let's establish a good process, good protocols to make sure that we walk away from this and everyone's happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gary. Before you leave, anyone have questions of Mr. Gary? Thank you very much. Also want to make sure everybody gets ample time to present. Who,
Yeah, reserve the right for later.
sure. Mr. Gary, who's your next witness? Thank you, sir.
Mayor, I do want to make sure that that we open the public hearing at the beginning. So if we didn't actually do that, I think the public hearing was open at the beginning when Chair Beltran began.
Correct. I apologize for not making that more notable.
Thank you so much, Robert. How are we doing on time?
Go ahead.
Okay. So here are two maps for the confidential tribal cultural resources protection. Appendix, which Mr. Gary described. So these describe the sites and the tracks. So this is additional substantial evidence the tribe is providing for the record. I'm going to start here and pass it this way.
All right, ma'am.
This report is the Gifford report, which is cited, I believe in both. Greg likes it. Yes, it's cited in the archaeological and cultural resources studies reports. We've highlighted for you the parts which are relevant to the Khoi Nation and Kulbadai particularly. So although this report is cited, we're submitting this as additional evidence so you can actually see the text that's in the report cited. So why is that important, right? That's important because the cultural resources study by Dr. White, the cultural resources study by Dr. Parker. Dr. Parker had a family emergency, so he can't be here today. I'm going to go over a bit of his report. I'm just a lawyer, not an archaeologist, but I'll do my best. And the substantial evidence provided by the tribe in consultation, they have commonalities, right? But they also have differences. And that's your job as the city. And I do believe the city is trying to do that, but we have to continue to learn and grow together. So Dr. White's report was a good start, right? And that report concluded in August of 2022, as he said. In September of 2022, Dr. Parker issued his cultural resources study. The city's archaeological report was not subsequently updated to include that information. That information, that substantial evidence is not considered, as far as we can tell, in the MND. I do note that the city issued an 11-page errata today, which we did not see ahead of time and we didn't have time to analyze. So I would respectfully ask on behalf of the tribe that you leave the record open till the end of the week, which is just another 48 hours, so that we have time to look at that errata and comment if necessary. Because in terms of public transparency, some of it might just be errata, but there's substantive language in terms of the cultural resources section and the tribal cultural resources section, which we haven't had a chance to analyze, and we would very much appreciate that opportunity. So let me pause there to see if you want to answer that question before I continue. I'm asking you to leave the administrative record open for another 48 hours to the end of the week, so the tribe has time to review the 11-page document, which was provided to us in the hearing today.
Understood. Yeah, it's going to take a little bit of time to dive into this, so I'm trying to do that as well as we can. Mr. Jones, any comment for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's up to the discretion of the council. You certainly can. I think the question is more whether you're going to make a decision tonight. You can always, I guess, leave the record open for further comment, but if you're going to make a decision tonight, you got to decide whether you're going to wait till you get that response back or not. And then we'd have to come back for that meeting.
Our council is going to give an overview of this in a little while, so you could decide after that.
So in terms of Dr. Parker's report, as Robert noted, it found tribal cultural resources at the surface level. That is why the tribe is asked, as a result of the disking the city did of the entire project site on May 25th. We've asked to do, and Chairman Beltran has generously offered to do an additional survey for free of that site. We think it's relevant now because the facts on the ground have changed because of the disking the city did. And so we don't know what additional tribal cultural resources may have been turned up by that disking, in particular, because we've already established here today, there's cultural soils mixed in on this project site from other archaeological sites and cultural resources sites, potentially. So we wouldn't normally offer to do a study for free, but we are in this case because we think it's so important. We've had correspondence where that offer has been rejected, but I just wanted to once again say publicly that offer stands. We're happy to do that survey for free. We think it's really important because, as Robert said, these resources are being harmed. And if you don't know what's there and you don't do the analysis as we go, we'll never know, right? And so then that's a lost opportunity for us all to learn together. So these reports, they're cumulative, right? Ideally, we want each study to add more evidence and have a more nuanced understanding. I asked Robert some questions about Dr. Parker's report this morning, and I know more today about the tribal cultural resources on this site after working on it for over a year than I did yesterday, right? So this is definitely something we're all learning at the same time. I want to be very clear that Dr. Parker's report said, and I believe Dr. White's report also noted, that the tribe has asked for tribal monitoring on this whole project site consistently. And the reason is, as Robert said, people lived near where the resources were. So if you think about the rivers now, right? We had a really wet winter. Where the river is shallow or deep changed. This year, it's a little different than last year. So if people were, for example, living near the shallow part of the river where the fish were caught, that actual physical location where they did that and where they processed the fish by the shallow part of the river, that's different year to year, slightly, because the river changes year to year. Multiply that over the habitation of this site. Tribal cultural knowledge says since time immemorial. Your archaeologist says, you're nodding at time immemorial, but the report says
Thousands of years.
Thousands of years. So if you think about the geographic area of the site and people moving just a little bit as the river changes and the resources location changes, maybe there's a fire where those acorn trees are, right? But then they grow back. It moves a little bit times thousands of years. What that means is there's substantial evidence based on the oral history of the tribe that there could be physical tribal cultural resources on this project site anywhere on the project site along the Kolbadiah waterway. So yes, the archaeologists have identified a very, very sensitive, intact, eligible for the historic records, cultural site. That does not mean legally or from the tribe's perspective that the only place we need tribal monitoring is that site or the buffer area maintained by the city, because there's substantial evidence that it's very likely, based on the way the site was used, as evidenced in Dr. Parker's report, as evidenced by the oral history we've received from Mr. Gary, who's a recognized cultural resources expert, that there could be resources outside of the buffer zone. So the city council has options today, right? We've provided in your binders from us proposed mitigation measures that we feel would make this mitigation, this MND adequate, which means much less legal risk to the city. Those mitigation measures, they're really refined to do two things. One is ensure there's tribal monitoring on the whole project site. That's the most important thing to the tribe. The other, I actually think we could adopt, and you could do that either by changes to the mitigation measures or as adopting a condition of approval, which you also have that opportunity to do if you approve a project. The other point those mitigation measures are designed to change is to really incorporate the tribal knowledge and on an equal footing, at least, with archaeologists in the field. But that could also be done, I believe, based on recent great working experience with Dr. White. We could also probably do that in the tribal treatment protocol, which your mitigation measures do call for. So if you're not comfortable with that language in the MND, I'm actually fairly confident if you gave us a little time, we could come to an agreement on language. So I hope that you will consider adopting an MND with revised mitigation measures today. And then the project gets to move forward, right? That saves everybody time and money and headache, and it's consistent with the better relationship we're trying to approve here. You do have other options, right? You could continue the hearing so that you have time to look at the evidence we've given you, and we have time to look at the 11-page document you've given us. And perhaps you want to direct us, at a government to government level with city council and the tribe, or have your CEQA consultant, Lisa Westwood, work with the TIPO, Mr. Geary, or have the lawyers sit down and work it out. I always enjoy spending time with you guys. Might not be mutual. But I just want to say, as part of this community, we think there's multiple options to resolve this dispute. We don't have to just, nobody wants to spend money on lawyers, right? And I say that as a lawyer. We don't have to go there. But I do have to tell you as a lawyer, your mitigation measures and the MND, that's not the level of work a city has to do to get to decide among experts, right? If you want to say Dr. White's report is the be all end all, forget Dr. Parker's report, forget Robert Geary's evidence, you have to do an EIR. And when you do an EIR, then you've done enough work to earn the deference to your decision-making authority as the lead agency. But at the mitigated negative declaration level that we're at, you got to consider all the evidence. And we've raised a fair argument that there is enough evidence to do an EIR in this case. And so again, that's why I'm humbly urging you to please consider revising your mitigation measures to more incorporate these tribal cultural resources protections. The last thing I want to say, and thank you for your time, is we are asking the city to take a cautious approach because these tribal cultural resources are so important. And it is a little different than what you might be used to before 2014 when AB 52 was adopted. So instead of saying, okay, a PhD archaeologist has identified a lithic scatter here, we'll avoid it. We're saying, look at the lithic scatter, look at the hearths, look at the river, look at all of it together, try to see through our eyes holistically as to what's there, understanding the evidence, thousands of years of habitation, not continuous habitation, but still habitation seasonally every year for thousands of years, and understand there could be we're so close, right? We're like 85% of the way to an agreement. You've already decided to cap the village site, right? Or the cultural area. Thank you for that. You've already decided to do a buffer zone around that area. Thank you for that. We appreciate it. And I realize it seems like we're always asking for one more thing, but it's two more things and then we're done. Just extend that buffer zone for monitoring to the site boundaries. That's all, because of your respect and appreciation for the significance of these resources in the community that's part of your community. So thank you for listening.
You said there were two things. And you
Yes.
mentioned one.
Well, if you give a mouse a cookie.
Don't take advantage, but what
Well,
else?
the other thing was the inclusion of tribal knowledge for decision-making in the field. And that honestly is the thing that I think we could work language out, that because you've already said, do a tribal cultural resources treatment protocol. I think you call it a protection plan. There's slightly different language. It just says, say you're in the field and there's a fire cracked stone. And the tribe says, I see this fire cracked stone, and Robert Geary could say this so much better than me. But if he's in the field, or Rob Morgan, who's a Khoi man, who's tribal monitor, he's here today, and he says, hey, I know what this is. I know what this is because I've seen it in ceremony that we still do today. Or I know what this is because my elders have told me. And in the unlikely event, Dr. White says, nah, I don't think so. That's not significant. We can just, or for example, here's a better example. Dr. White, as a scientist, might say, I see this and I really like it and I want to study it. So I would like to take it to Chico State or Sonoma State and curate it and study it, maybe do some destructive data analysis. Sorry for picking on you. That's what we should do as a scientist. And it might happen that in the field, Mr. Gary or Mr. Morgan are saying, look, this is really important to us culturally, and our culture says, don't mess with it, right? If you find, I know in other religions, right? If you find cultural artifact, you would like it not analyzed, not put in a museum, just left alone, thank you very much, or reburied,
Understood.
right? So we just want to have that conversation on equal footing in the field. And right now the mitigation measures don't quite say that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you for
Any
asking.
questions of this witness at this time? Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
At this point, I'd like to open it up for public comment on this item. If there's a member here who would like to speak, please step to the microphone and do so. I believe Ms. Robinson and Mr. Gary were about 10 minutes over the 30-minute window. So is that about right, Madam Clerk?
That's
my
correct,
time estimate.
Mr. Mayor.
I'm sorry.
That's correct.
Thank you. Ms. Mitchum, would you like to come and introduce yourself in case we don't know you? I hope not.
Get out of here. Okay, then. My name is Helen Mitchum. I'm on the board of South Shore Little League. And usually I have been here talking about Little League and how much Little League really wants this ball field. So I got to feeling after being here a couple of different times for these meetings that Mr. Gary might be talking to me about not understanding the culture. So I made it a point to do a tiny bit of research at home about the Koi Nation and the cultural aspect of living in Lake County, which has a lot of native culture in it. I decided maybe I needed to walk a mile in their shoe. So I tried to research a little bit. I was surprised to hear that the Koi Nation was here in Lake County. All you hear about, or all I have ever heard about, is the Pomo. So it seemed to me like that was it. That was what we had. Now we've got a new one that we have to learn about. I think it's kind of interesting that the plan has been modified over the months that it's been going on, and it's now looks like it is going to incorporate some of the cultural aspects. And I think that's pretty neat. I have been in Hawaii when the native people there have done blessings on projects and that type of thing. So I'm hoping that something like that might happen as far as this goes also. The native culture that I have read about, and that the people who I know who are natives are very focused on family. They're very focused on their culture, and their ancestors play a big role. So that seems to be what we're discussing here in this project. Great respect for that. Everybody loves their family. Some we know, some we don't know, some are long gone, but not forgotten. And I guess with a culture that has, in some cases, no written language, it's all passed on. So it's very personal at that point. Children's voices would probably be pretty neat for this area. And I'm really hoping that we can move forward, get past all of the discrepancies that might be there, and get some kids playing baseball and softball and soccer on this property, and make it something that the Koi Nation can be proud of, and that our city can be proud of. We are hosting a baseball and a softball tournament on the fields at Redbud this July. And we are so excited next time to bring them to a brand new ball field. We are going to have a picture on the banner, a banner on the ball field of the map of the new project that says coming soon. So I'm hoping that we can live that out. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Would anyone else like to offer their opinion at this time? I failed to mention when Ms. Mitchum got up, I would like to limit this to 3 minutes. So you see a lot of people here. If everyone wanted to speak, would be here for most of the afternoon. So please contain your comments to 3 minutes after the presentations are made. Sir, if you could introduce yourself.
My name is Rob Morgan. I'm a member of Koi Nation. I'm a tribal monitor, executive assistant. I'm also a resident. I live in Lower Lake.
Thank you, sir.
I just wanted to give a little bit of just a brief history of who I am, who we are. So I stay here in Lake County. I'm now a resident. It hasn't always been that. I grew up in Sonoma County. And part of that reason of me growing up in Sonoma County is just I'm going to try to squeeze this in my history of our people. So some of our family, we had to relocate, and that was due to the arrival of the Spanish. It was due to the gold rush. I'm not here to point fingers. I'm not doing anything. This is just a quick history. So prior to the arrival, there were 3 islands, southeastern Pomo. We had 3 different tribes here: Kamdot, Ilem, and Koi. Koi we're in Koi territory right now. So the first massacres took place with General Vallejo. And that's what kind of started getting us to move. We couldn't live the way we lived. We couldn't cremate the way we used to cremate. We started hiding. And after Vallejo, after the kidnappings and slavery, a lot of our family were displaced, they were kidnapped, they were murdered. And a lot of them died from diseases. So after Vallejo, and then we had the gold miners come in. And even with the gold miners, we had kidnappings. I'm sure we're all familiar with the Kelseys and, with what happened. But due to that, we had the Bloody Island Massacre. And from that, we only had so many people living on the island. We only had so many families that were left. And at this time, squatters started coming in and they started taking over the land. My great uncle, he was a boy on Koi Island, on Indian Island. And he remembers when they left and they went to Rattlesnake Island to ghost dance. This ghost dance was one of the last things it was the last plea for help. And they prayed for years. And by the time they were done and they went back, their home was gone. There were people living on there. They could not go there. So they had to try to find other places, which a lot of the family moved out to Elam, or they went out to Cache Creek, which is called Badai. And that's a long down road. So we had a lot of families that were living there. Can I get one
Go
more
ahead
minute?
and wrap up, sir.
I'm sorry. Okay. So we had families that were living there as long as they could. And even there, they had to fight. They had to fight for the area. Their houses were burned down. They were chased off. And eventually, my family, the Johnson family, we ended up relocating to Sonoma County. And that's why today, when you see Koi Nation of Northern California, we relocated because of we were trying to survive. But one thing we did lose was a part of our culture. So a part of our culture was lost. We had to leave this area. And Elam still practices that today. I have blood that comes from Elam and Kamdot. And they practice it today. Luckily, it was able to stay alive. And today we're able to look up to people like Robert Geary. We have spiritual leaders like that we can go to, and we could get some of our history. And because of that, what I'm saying is we've already lost so much. I am a direct descendant of, if we find something here, there's most likely that it's blood related to me if we find a body within this area. And all I'm trying to say is we want to be part of this. We want to be part of, if something's found, we want to be able to put it away the best we can. We want to be able to hold it. We don't just want it to get tilled over and pushed to the side. That's all we're asking. We just want to be a part of this. We've already lost a lot.
Thank you.
And that's why we're here today.
Thank
And
you,
it's
sir.
my obligation to come and speak and say that.
Thank you for sharing.
Good morning or good afternoon, Mayor, Council. My name is Nav Gurm and I'm going to cede my time to Robert Gary.
I do want to point out that at a previous meeting, we were instructed that you can't really share time during a public comment, during presentation. That would have been acceptable. But I'm going to allow this. Mr. Gary, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I thank you. I appreciate it. I just kind of want to also respond to the lady from the baseball league.
Mhm.
I'm glad, that, seeing that there's an organization that really wants inclusion and wants change as well. Pomo is not a tribe. Pomo is not even a name that we've given ourselves. This is something that basically an anthropologist basically gave us. It's 2 words put together, po, which is the word for magnesite, and mo is actually the word for cave or hole, where it actually came from and was mined. And because our languages were similar, they called us that, not ourselves. So just for that, and I'm willing, I'll give you my card to be able to help out in any way I can, I think, to give some type of training. But those are the things I think is even understanding, like even the territories that we're in, understanding the language and really knowing what that is. The word Badai means creek or river. So Kul Badai is, like I said before, it's not necessarily the name of a village. It's actually the name of the waterway. Badai, which is an old village that's right off of Cache Creek. They called it that because Cache Creek was such a huge body of water, and it just means creek. So between the 2 waterways, those are your boundaries for Khoi. And everything that's in between, and Anderson, or I'm sorry, Indian Island, they call it now, are the Aboriginal territories of Khoi. And literally, calmed out like they were talking about earlier. So I think it's really important to understand and to know that culture, and anything that I can do, because a lot of the people that I learned from, and I was raised by my grandparents' generation, are the same people that are in a lot of these reports. Nelson Hopper, Mark's Chapo, Jimmy Brown. I say uncle, and there's actually some things I learned from your uncle about some of the things that he was taught from our elders that were out in Elam. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to be around really knowledgeable people and raised with it. So I think with that said, anything that I can provide to do to help the city of Clearlake, hopefully to see some Southeastern Pomo language splattered or even put on the name of a sports complex would be great. And I think that would be definitely something to consider. But I really want to see inclusion, and I'm hoping that that can happen in the time that I can see my children enjoy that. Not only to be on the baseball field, but actually to be on a baseball field that they have connection to. So, just with that said, I just kind of wanted to make that opening and offering, I think, to anyone that I can help better understand, I think, the community, because a lot of the publications, the publishings that are out there are not from the tribal perspective. They are from somebody who came in and gave their perspective of what they thought they heard. So
Thank you, Mr. Gary.
yeah, thank you.
Anyone else wishing to make public comment at this time?
Good afternoon, William Chisholm. I'm an attorney for the Khoi Nation, also a member of the public. So in 3 minutes or less, I just want to alert you that within the handouts you have today, we've provided some legal authorities that we think could be useful for you. It's essentially a PowerPoint presentation, but we'll let you look at those. Explains why we think the current MND is defective in terms of tribal cultural resource mitigation, in terms of cumulative analysis of the impacts, in terms of resource analysis, for example, in terms of whether the water supply for the project has been adequately analyzed, whether there's available water, and in terms of whether there needs to be a NEPA federal analysis given federal funds involved. These are the same authorities that the court's going to look at. We're confident that the court will follow the way we are explaining it. You've got counsel. You may think otherwise. That involves risk to the project, risk to the budget, and risk for delay. We would submit the better option is to take a look at the options Ms. Roberson stated and consider those in lieu of trying to go down that risky route. And so with that, I would say urge you to look at the materials we've submitted. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, sir. Open it up for someone else. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Batsalwan Brown. I'm a member of the Elam Pomo tribe. And I've been listening and following this project. And I think this is a great opportunity for the city to demonstrate the openness to work with the tribal communities. For too long, we've been kind of the smokescreen on development, not proceeding. And I've heard it stated by my relative, Robert, the tribes just want to monitor. And with all due respect, we have a lot at risk as tribal people, thousands and thousands of years of history. Just over the hill in the village of Elam, there was an artifact found that dated 22,000 years old. That puts our people here in this place. Elam is a sister tribe to the Khoi Nation, and we're supportive of Khoi Nation and everything they're asking for. And I would encourage, everyone involved to take a different look at this. And we have something unique here in this community that only the city of Clear Lake has when it comes to the history that goes back thousands and thousands of years. And this is your opportunity to embrace that history. Another part of that history I want to share really quickly, and I want to say too, I'm in support of the sports complex. I've supported South Shore. I played South Shore Little League. Coach was a board member at one time. But to remember the names of the places. And so a part of the movement is to remove some of the old head thinking. And I hear this from young people all the time. And so when we look at the history of Burns Valley, it goes back to Burn Brown, my great-great-grandfather, who homesteaded this land. And at that time, indentured my great-great-grandmother, Fanny Mateo, who was living on one of the family tracts of land here and had children with her. And so when we think about names, the importance of me as a tribal person seeing something in the city that I can recognize that's unique, that shows that I'm here is important. And so one of my comments is to look at another name besides the Burns Valley Sports Complex, because again, there's a history there that the city should be aware of. That's not a proud history. It's important to understand that we as tribal people have seen the city again fail time and time again. I was in the 8th grade when the Pomo School was built. My father led the protest because of the destruction of the sites up there to build the Pomo School, Jim Brown. And so we again have witnessed the loss of our history, the failure of the city and the county at times to not recognize and account by their own laws that are mandated to protect these sites. I've worked with Dr. White, and worked with Dr. Parker. And a lot of times it's important, and they'll acknowledge that the information tribal people bring to the story of all of this is important. And again, we give that out of the goodness of who we are to help broaden the perspective of this place we all share. And so we have to acknowledge that. And so it's important that that's considered. It's important that we look a little deeper into this history and also give the people who are making decisions the most accurate information. And so a lot of times I know that doesn't happen. I know you're restricted to what's in front of you, but there's more history that doesn't come inside of these reports and these analyses that the commissioners are looking at. And so the best information is important. And so I wanted to say that I'm watching this project. Tribal communities are watching this project, and we hope it ends for the best. And I also want to acknowledge I've had high school friends of mine who've worked here in the construction industry on various projects permitted by the county and the cities, and they'll let us know when their companies are finding artifacts and are taking them home. And that's happened several times here in the city of Clear Lake, but there's just been no avenue to address it because there's never been an openness. And so today we share that openness and we share the ability to come together, have these conversations and broaden our knowledge. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Anyone else at this time? Good afternoon.
Hello. Good afternoon. Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council, staff. Erin McCarrick, City of Clear Lake. I've communicated to all of you guys about this issue via email or in person, and also about, and as a planning commissioner and as a citizen, I've also communicated about how the planning commission gets information and when they're engaged in the planning process and how it can be improved. I have no interest in the outcome of this beyond just the objective need to do the tribal preservation of cultural resources and to the continued growth of the city and an open government. One thing I learned as a planning commissioner is that there is a solution. There's always a solution. One of the solutions that could be done today so that the sports park could move forward and that the tribal cultural resources can be honored and preserved is either revise the mitigative negative declaration. You can always do conditions of approval. You can do an extension of time to come to an agreement. There's ways, and we on the planning commission, we were able to do those things. One of the things that I'm not sure was brought up with the planning commission is that they were able to do that. Maybe that was one of the roadblocks that they could have given a condition of approval or brought up the conversations of these issues. I first became aware of this issue when I was on the planning commission in September 2022. And I was actually confused as to why there wasn't full tribal monitoring in that, because on the Valley Fire and the Clayton Fire, we had a tribal monitor the entire time. And the regional tribe, the Middletown Rancheria, found numerous artifacts because of that, because there was somebody with us. They came to our morning meetings. They trained our crews on how to look for things, where to find things. And that was stuff that had been there. Everything had been there for years and years and years, and they still found a lot of artifacts. Additionally, every cannabis project going before the Lake County Planning Commission is subject to AB 52, and many of them have been told to employ tribal monitors. So this is just, it's the law of the land now. And so how do we move forward? How do we find a solution? Each side wants a solution. The city wants to preserve cultural resources and continue the growth. The tribe wants to see a sports park. So is it that there wasn't enough information given to the planning commission that could have been nipped in the bud in the beginning? Is it money? Is it a matter of what the tribal monitoring is going to cost? That was one of the questions that came up at the planning commission, and neither side had an answer. So is that something like, just get it out there? Let's talk about it. Is it that, the council or the staff believes that everything is so far underneath that it's not going to matter? I think the Valley Fire and the splash pad taught us differently on that. There's just so many ways to find a solution today before it moves either to an EIR or a lawsuit. So much of the money that could be used on that could be maybe paid for the tribal monitoring. So, what is the solution? Where does it, what is the holdup? What is the solution? You guys have worked so hard. Both sides have worked so hard. And I hope that there is one today. Again, AB 52 and continued legislation from the state of California is the law of the land. So today, plus the future mitigation measures, hopefully will provide a wonderful working relationship, as Salwan had mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McCarrick. Anyone else? Madam Clerk, is there anyone on Zoom that would like to speak?
There is one hand raised on Zoom, Mr. Mayor. And that would be Mario Polari.
Hi, my name is Mario Polari, attorney with the Native American Heritage Commission. I've submitted a comment letter for this issue that's before the Clearlake Planning Commission. With the commission's approval, I will read it off if that's all right.
You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Dear Clearlake Planning Commission, the Native American Heritage Commission is submitting the following comment letter for the City of Clear Lake's Burns Valley Sports Project appeal hearing to highlight relevant statutory language regarding this matter. First, the commission has an explicit role under the CEQA to assist tribes and local governments to establish a meaningful consultation process at the earliest possible point in the CEQA environmental review process so that tribal cultural resources can be identified and culturally appropriate mitigation measures can be considered by the lead agency. Second, the commission has the express authority to take legal action to prevent severe and irreparable damage to sacred sites on public property. Lastly, please note that the commission is listed as a public agency with specific expertise with respect to the places of special religious or social significance to Native Americans, including archaeological sites, cemeteries, and places of worship. Please take this relevant statutory language into your consideration. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your brevity. Is there anyone else? Madam Clerk?
There are no further hands raised on the Zoom, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much.
I move that we close the public hearing.
I have a motion to close the public hearing, seeing that no one else is.
Yeah, actually, the final rebuttal would be part of the public hearing, so.
Oh, I apologize, Mr. Jones. So, Mr. Flora, go ahead.
You can restrict
Public comment.
public comment.
I was just gonna
but we
close public
still
comment.
Would hear from the staff and then from the appellant.
Councilmember Slotin beat me to the punch. Mr. Flora, go ahead.
Well, um, there's kind of a lot I would like to say, but I think I'll just let Dr. Parker and our council address it, other than
Dr. White.
or Dr. White. Sorry about that. But I do want to pause really quickly. I mean, we didn't go over the mitigation measures related to tribal cultural resources that are in this MND. I'm sure that you've all have reviewed them, but I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's being said here that makes it seem like the city has no concern for tribal resources, is not interested in addressing them, hasn't provided for meaningful consultation and so forth. These two sites, as you know, one of the disagreements is because one way to avoid tribal monitoring in a lot of cases is to do a cap and fill type of method to avoid any impacts. That those tactics are being employed in this case, in addition to tribal monitoring. And there's a lot of other things. I mean, we've never included this many mitigation measures for tribal cultural resources in an environmental document since I've been here, at least. So I just wanted to is my time up, Ms. Swanson? So I just want to make sure that you're familiar with the mitigation measures, don't have any questions. We can go through them in more detail if you do, but I just wanted to make sure that kind of that possible misconception was addressed, that there wasn't anything addressing these.
Okay.
No questions?
Any questions? So I've got a request by Councilmember Overton for a short recess. I'm going to grant that recess. We will reconvene here at 20 to the hour, which would be a 5-minute break. Is that enough time? Okay, everyone come to order, please. Mr. Flora?
Okay, so I'd like to ask Dr. White to provide a little bit of response. I mean, there was some mentions to Dr. Parker's report. And I know that in having a number of conversations with Dr. White about that there's a little, well, I'll just let him explain the sort of difference of perspective on the validity of some of that. And then this has come up a few times, so I would really like to see if very briefly Dr. White could explain, it was brought up about the splash pad project and how there was unexpected discovery of artifacts during that project. And from my perspective, it wasn't unexpected. It's just well, and I would just like Dr. White to kind of speak to what we knew, what we expected on that project to sort of hopefully clarify that moving forward, and then to address his thoughts on the conclusions of Dr. Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Dr. White.
Thank you. I do want to acknowledge that Koi Nation has received my memo, the 11-page memo you mentioned only today. Is that correct? So I'm not going to hit this hard, heavy right now in my discussion. I just want to point out that when you read it, that the point I'm making is in that report, in that memo, if you flip simply to attachment C, you'll note that the site that Dr. Parker identified based on surface materials.
Hold on,
Yeah.
Dr. White, that wasn't part of the.
Wasn't part
I
of
have,
it. Okay.
I have copies that I can
I'm
share.
sorry.
This would,
I have to give you something else that you haven't seen. That
is this,
yeah, here.
is there anything that you would, yeah, I mean, yeah, so this would be considered confidential here.
Which the tribe has the ability to. Yeah, thank you. Sorry that you didn't have. You want another copy of it to look at?
I gave him a few copies.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay. Right. My response to Parker's report is contained in that memo. And I note that which you've acknowledged that Parker's reconnaissance was surface only. And I want to point out that the site that Dr. Parker identified as something that I missed actually corresponds precisely to the location of the 1940s barns where I did identify our surface archaeological material contained in foreign fills. So I did not regard that as qualifying as a historical resource under CEQA because it was transported material. But I will acknowledge that I need to do a better job of recording those redeposits. I think Robert really hit a home run today in terms of drawing attention to that very issue. It's huge. And I agree wholeheartedly with everything he said about that. So I failed on that end. And that's something that I think Robert has been very effective about reminding me of and trying to improve my game in the future. But so in other words, I don't know that Parker's finding really changes my perspective on what was out there. But I do acknowledge that there are lots of deposits out there containing cultural materials. And I think that the difference that we're seeing that runs through this is how I look at it as an archaeologist under the legal framework that I operate under, which is to identify heritage resources as opposed to, as Robert so effectively pointed out here today, as opposed to tribal cultural resources and how they're defined. And I think what I heard from Robert that it affected me most was the notion that the treatment of those resources contained in those redeposits should be understood to be understood within the tribe's heritage sensitivities. And I understand and support that notion. So that's simply all I had to say. I do want to point out too that distinction between what I regard as a heritage resource under CEQA, as opposed to the tribe's regard for TCRs, also runs through that splash pad project. And we discussed this before, that we were aware that there was a lot of transported material on that property. And again, I address the part of the record that has integrity, that qualified under CEQA. And the materials lacking integrity, I did not consider to be significant, and so the project proceeded. So that same distinction runs all the way through our discussions in all of these topics. So it's a matter of clarification that I wanted to bring up, and just to point out that our discussions revolve around that issue, the foreign fills as opposed to the intact deposits. Much of what we are discussing here revolves around that very issue. And that concludes my statement.
Okay, so you all have the memo. Could you also briefly address the splash pad project?
Yeah, I think I just did. The splash pad operates on the same principle, that there were intact deposits that I identified as historical resources, and that we developed protocols for the protection of those resources. They were intact and buried resources, but the upper 18 to 24 inches of Austin Park actually was built by Charles Austin using transported materials. He had a ball field out there in 1927, and leveled it using transported materials that contained archaeology. I concluded that those transported materials lacked integrity, much as the transported materials in the Burns Valley Sports Complex lacked integrity, and therefore didn't require additional archaeological protection measures. And the tribe has pointed out that their concerns pertain to the cultural materials located or contained within those transported materials. And I think that's my objective here, or my purpose here, just discussing this at this point, is to point out that that's the theme that runs through both of those projects. You know, as an archaeologist, I'm not in a position to change CEQA or its effect on my conclusions. But I also don't speak to the issue of tribal cultural resources, which is the province of the tribe under AB 52. And so I wanted to make that distinction. That's something that Robert and I, as we work together, have wanted to and intended to and deliberately maintain that distinction. That I, as an archaeologist, I speak to the archaeological issues, and as a TIPO, Robert speaks to the tribal issues. So I wanted to point out that that's, if you hadn't detected that, if you weren't aware of it, that's the thing that runs down. That's the river that runs through all of this.
If we could pause and see if there's any questions on Dr.
Any
Wade's.
questions up to this point?
Just a clarification. So all these piles that
Turn your mic on.
the big pile that is behind the Safeway, basically, all came from some other place. Some of them came from right there, and some of them came from who knows where.
We don't really know where most of the things come from. I want to, perhaps the most abrupt and meaningful is, right now, is that your city offices are built on top of a former mound. we don't know where the material that was removed in 1955 when the strip mall was originally built. Henry Malden stood out there on the street and recorded the whole event because he understood it to be so important. We don't know where that material went either. And things have been moving around on the landscape ever since. So these redeposits are everywhere.
So if there was anything in those piles, it would have been already been totally disturbed and
Yeah,
ground up and
that's
whatever,
why
right?
under the guidance that I follow in CEQA,
And that's not significant
the
at that
threat,
point.
the first threshold for determining significance and treatment is integrity. And those deposits lack integrity, and therefore
Right.
they don't represent historical resources.
I'm trying to understand what the,
So the CEQA threshold is what, Doctor?
Integrity is defined as a deposit that has received minimal
disturbance.
to moderate damage. In other words, it's that it has not been moved and and it has never been heavily disturbed.
So that big pile came from someplace else. So it has to have been totally disturbed or destroyed.
It lacks integrity.
It lacks integrity.
Yeah.
And that's the threshold for CEQA.
On the CEQA side, but that is exclusive to the archaeological
Right.
interpretation. But AB 52 gives the tribes agency in defining the nature of tribal cultural resources. And I am not in a position to define what those tribal cultural resources are. But
you're
what
not
I
a
hear the
tribal
tribe saying today, I think Ollie and Robert were both very effective in that they perceive the foreign fills containing cultural deposits, cultural materials as a TCR. So I wanted you to be aware that that is the distinction here.
And for clarity, earlier in your report, you indicated that some of the fill you estimated came in one instance, the Augulin Canyon site, based on the geology.
Yeah.
And your understanding of that there were similarities.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, it's a distinctive kind of a gravel. And I've been up to that quarry to have a look, and there are artifacts all the way through. The gravels are infused with artifacts. Say again?
What depth of fill is down to?
The fills vary. When Austin built, when Austin installed the ball field across the street from us in 1927. By the way, if you guys don't know, just so you're aware that you're approaching the 100-year anniversary of the invention of the city of Clearlake. And Charles Austin was a guy from San Francisco who created the city by building the park and the homes on the tree streets. There was nothing here but that. And when he built the park, he hauled in soil to fill in the park and put in a ball field. And he hauled in gravel to build the beach over there. You know, and I've augured through that gravel, and underneath that gravel is black Clearlake mud from the original shoreline tule bed that used to be there. He filled in and exterminated the tule bed and extended that out. So he reconfigured this landscape, and including channelizing Kulbadai Creek to its current extent. And so there are, you know, that's just the start, right? I mean, the city is full of events like that happened after 1927. Yeah. So the transport of materials are practically, well, I know that Addie will tell you it's an issue on practically every project. So they're everywhere.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Any more, Mr. Floor?
I just want to turn over to our council to specifically address the issues raised by the COI on behalf of the city.
Thank you, council.
Thank you. So I went through the as an attorney hired by the city, I went through the documentations that's been prepared up to this hearing and did an analysis. You may recall the last time I was here, it's a little bit lengthy and it's a lawyer speaking, so you can bear with me. I'll try not to read the entire report, and it's long, 25 pages. So I'll try and keep it limited to more of the highlighted or the highlights here and tell you my analysis of the administrative record that's been received. Some of it's going to be background that you're probably already familiar with, but I will go over it as well. In accordance with the city's Native American Tribal Consultation Program guidelines found in Appendix O of the city's environmental review guidelines, archaeological consultants, Subterra Heritage Resource Investigations, Subterra, which is Dr. White's business, began work on a cultural resource investigation of the project site and initiated coordination with Khoi Nation in January 2021 to address resources of concern to the tribe that could potentially be found on site. Potential resources included possible archaeological and non-archaeological traditional cultural properties. Although the Khoi expressed concern that there may be burial sites in the project area, an extensive field investigation that took place over the course of 3 days from February 22nd to 24th, 2021, did not reveal any resources in the location that was purported to contain burials. Khoi representatives were present and participated throughout the course of the field investigation. During the course of the field investigation, 38 backhoe trench probes were dug throughout the project site. These trench probes were approximately 2 feet wide, between 8 and 12 feet long, and dug to a maximum depth of between 4 to 8.5 feet. Investigation of the material found in these trench probes resulted in the discovery of 2 intact buried archaeological sites, both of which Subterra determined were considered significant cultural resources. The first one was found buried at depths of 16 to 32 inches. The second was found at a depth of 20 to 28 inches, both below what is considered to be maximum 19th and 20th century plow depth. Throughout the site, obsidian artifacts were found in association with remote fill that had been dumped on site, and Subterra determined that these redeposits did not constitute cultural resources. According to the report, the city redesigned the project to eliminate any effects on these significant cultural sites. Khoi representatives approved the redesign. The city and Khoi entered into Assembly Bill, that's AB 52, tribal consultation for the project. This is separate from what's already happened. An in-person consultation occurred beginning on March 9th, 2022. After circulating the MND for comment and review, the city received an email from Khoi representative and Tribal Historic Preservation Officer Robert Geary requesting further AB 52 consultation, and the city subsequently received written comments from the tribe regarding the adequacy of the MND on September 2nd, 2022. The City Planning Commission held an initial hearing for the project in September 2022, but did not make a determination on the project at that time. The city and the Khoi subsequently re-engaged in AB 52 consultation and met on October 12th, 2022 and October 20th, 2022 to take part in good faith consultation regarding the project's potential impacts on tribal cultural resources. Although the city and the tribe met in good faith and with reasonable effort, they were ultimately unable to reach a mutual agreement regarding further avoidance and or mitigation measures for the project's potential impacts on TCR. Nevertheless, the city amended the MND to include supplemental mitigation measures recommended by the Khoi to further ensure protection of TCR. The city officially ended AB 52 tribal negotiations via letter on March 21st, 2023. The City Planning Commission approved the project April 25th, 2023, and Khoi appealed. That's what this hearing is. In their attached letter to the mayor and council members, the Khoi cited a number of deficiencies in the city's environmental review for the project, and in addition to a number of amendments to the project's mitigation measures, requested that an environmental impact report be prepared. So skip a little bit forward. I'll read to you the definition of TCR. So that was kind of mentioned briefly. This is in the Public Resources Code, section 21074. Tribal cultural resources are either of the following: sites, features, places, cultural landscapes, sacred places, and objects with cultural value to a California Native American tribe that are either of the following: A, or 1, included or determined to be eligible for inclusion in the California Register of Historical Resources, or 2, included in a local register of historical resources as defined in another subdivision. Now, or it could be this: a tribal cultural resource could be, if it doesn't meet what I just read, it also could be a resource determined by the lead agency in its discretion and supported by substantial evidence to be significant pursuant to criteria set forth in another section. In applying the criteria set forth in that other section for purposes of this paragraph, the lead agency shall consider the significance of the resource to a California Native American tribe. Okay, now I'm going to jump back here on page 3, the second full paragraph. For all projects where notice of preparation is filed for an MND, AB 52 requires the lead agency to consult with any California Native American tribe traditionally and culturally affiliated with the geographic area of the proposed project, if requested by such a tribe upon notice of the proposed project. If requested, the consultation must include alternatives to the project, recommended mitigation measures, or significant effects on tribal cultural resources. The consultation may include discussion concerning the type of environmental review necessary, resources, and if necessary, project alternatives, or the appropriate measures for preservation or mitigation that the California Native American tribe may have recommended to the lead agency. The tribal consultation period is not considered over until either of the following occurs: 1, the parties agree to measures to mitigate or avoid a significant effect, if a significant effect exists on tribal cultural resources, or 2, if a party acting in good faith and after reasonable effort concludes that mutual agreement cannot be reached. As noted above, the city met all of these procedural and substantive requirements of both CEQA and AB 52 in conducting their good faith consultation with the COI. The city met with the COI representatives on numerous occasions, and although the parties were unable to reach total agreement, the city made numerous concessions to the tribe by adding TCR-specific mitigation measures to the MND, as well as other conditions of approval to the project at the COI's behest. As noted previously, the project's impact to TCR was already less than significant with the existing mitigation. Nevertheless, the city added these additional mitigation measures and conditions as a token of good faith in respect to the COI. Despite good faith and reasonable efforts, the city concluded that mutual agreement on this particular project could not be reached and ended AB 52 tribal consultation on March 21st, 2023. So that's kind of the background of the consultation process that occurred. Now I'll go into some explanation as to the legal standard on a mitigated negative declaration and the fair argument standard. The city's decision to issue a negative declaration is reviewed for prejudicial abuse of discretion under the fair argument standard. A party who challenges a lead agency's adoption of an MND bears the burden of identifying in the record substantial evidence of a fair argument on the environment that would not be mitigated. Substantial evidence includes fact, a reasonable assumption predicated upon fact, or expert opinion supported by fact, but not argument, speculation, unsubstantiated opinion, or narrative. Evidence which is clearly inaccurate or erroneous, or evidence of social or economic impacts. Mere allegations of significant impact in the absence of substantial evidence are not enough to trigger an EIR. Expert opinion that lacks factual foundation is not substantial evidence, and predictions of significant impacts alone are insufficient absent significant impacts in the record supporting a fair argument. Courts must give an agency the benefit of a doubt on any legitimate disputed issues of credibility in determining whether particular evidence is substantial. The absence of substantial evidence of an environmental impact does not necessarily create a fair argument that the impact is significant. The burden of proof remains on the challenging party to demonstrate by citation to the record the existence of substantial evidence supporting a fair argument of significant environmental impact. Now, that's the standard we're looking at here. Now we'll go through what's kind of been alleged and responses. In both the appeal letter and the September 2nd, 2022 letter, the COI contend that there are TCRs on the project site that have not been accounted for in the MND, and that the mitigation measures that have been adopted for the project are inadequate. In making these allegations, the tribe states that it has presented substantial evidence of TCRs on site that would require the preparation of an EIR. Tribe points to numerous prehistoric archaeological sites and waterways that are next to and/or inside the project site that were identified in Robert Geary's email, the presence of a water source on or near the project, which is culturally important because it contains the Clearlake hitchchi fish, the tribal cultural significance of the Burns Valley generally, and an archaeological report, the Parker report, that determined, among other things, that the two sites identified as culturally significant in the Subterra report were in fact one contiguous archaeological site. While there's little doubt that there is evidence of TCR both on and around the project site, the main source of contention between the tribe and the city is with regard to what may be considered TCR, where TCR is located on site, and the adequacy of the city's proposed mitigation of those sites. Okay, so I already read the definition of what a TCR is, which is that next paragraph. So I'll skip down the next paragraph, which is second paragraph on that page. The Subterra report, CRI report, determined that the first and second sensitive sites, were both culturally significant sites that were potentially eligible for inclusion in the California Register of Historic Places under Public Resources Code section. As both of those sites are considered TCR under Public Resources Code, or as such, both are considered TCR. In response to these discoveries, the city changed the project siting and proposed mitigation measures in the MND to ensure that there would be no significant impact to those sites. These mitigation measures are in accordance with those provided by statute. The relevant mitigation measures for reducing the project impact on TCR are provided in this report, also in the MND. Subterra's report does not consider previously disturbed remote fill that contains crushed obsidian and other excavation spoils or redeposits to constitute cultural resources. Given that these spoils, including obsidian artifacts that were found on site, are not eligible for inclusion as a historical resource, as defined under Public Resources Code, section 21074A1, the determination of whether to classify these types of objects as TCR is within the discretion of the lead agency and must be supported by substantial evidence. The city, in accordance with the findings in the CRI Subterra report, do not believe that there is substantial evidence to conclude that these redeposited artifacts are eligible for inclusion in the historic register and therefore are not considered TCR under section 21074A2. The COI, however, contend that the entire project area represents TCR in large part due to the findings in the Parker report that found no break in surface artifacts scattered between the two site areas reported in the CRI report, and that these two sites are in fact a single site with areas of artifact concentration. Although COI monitors were directly engaged in the identification and boundary determination for the two sites and concurred on the identification of the sites, the COI now asserts that the Parker report undercuts Subterra's findings. COI contend that, among other things, the findings in the Parker report contain substantial evidence of a fair argument that TCR on the project site will not be fully mitigated to a less than significant level. Under CEQA, a lead agency may not weigh conflicting substantial evidence to determine whether an EIR must be prepared And it is the function of an EIR, not a negative declaration, to resolve conflicting claims based on substantial evidence as to the environmental effects of a project. Nevertheless, while the city is not allowed to weigh the veracity of Subterra report's findings against those that are found in the Parker report, expert opinion that lacks factual foundation or is speculative or clearly inaccurate does not represent substantial evidence. Here, the Parker report's author, John Parker, PhD, entered the project area at the behest of the COI and without any accompaniment from the tribe or authorization from the city. After finding a number of obsidian artifacts on the ground in between Site 1 and Site 2, Dr. Parker concluded that these surface finds suggested that the two sites may be a single site with areas of artifact concentration. Dr. Parker, however, did not buttress these claims in any way, such as by conducting subsurface probes. This lack of support is important considering the fact that Subterra discovered the intact sites buried at depths of 16 to 32 inches and also conducted subsurface probes between the two sites in the area that Dr. Parker found his surface artifact scatter. Subterra's subsurface probes between the two sites found nothing beneath the soil. Thus, Dr. Parker's conclusions are speculative, lack support, and are erroneous. Because of these deficiencies in the Parker report, it does not represent substantial evidence of a fair argument that there will be unmitigated impacts to TCR on the project site. Further, to the extent that the Parker report considers excavation spoils or redeposits of obsidian artifacts significant cultural resources, as discussed above, the city, in its discretion, may determine that these types of artifacts do not constitute TCR. Notably, the Parker report states that the only additional comment to Subterra's report is a suggestion to have an archaeologist on site to observe placement of the cap, which the city intends to do. Subterra's report fully documents, acknowledges, identifies, and maps locations in the Burns Valley Sports Complex parcel where foreign fills containing geological and cultural obsidian fragments were placed during the 20th century. In other words, in the last 80 years, foreign fills containing obsidian were brought to and dumped on the parcel in 3 locations. These include, first, gravel and sand fill containing obsidian flakes dumped on the parcel sometime pre-1940 and used to build up a corral and barn near the west center of the parcel. Second, a demolition debris fill sack containing primarily geological and some cultural obsidian dumped in the southeast corner of the parcel and derived from construction of the adjacent shopping mall. And third, a long, broad strip of foreign soils containing demolition debris and primarily geological and some cultural obsidian dumped in the west center of the parcel in the center rows of the former Walnut Orchard area. This material was dumped around the mid-1990s and appeared to have been derived from construction of the nearby Pomo School. Dr. Parker's report failed to recognize, acknowledge, or account for these sources of foreign fill. Further, his report focuses on surface obsidian he found in the area that Subterra had already determined was formerly occupied by the pre-1940s barn and corral. Dr. Parker claims that the surface obsidian represents an undocumented extension of one or both of the sites identified in Subterra's report. However, Subterra's report makes clear that both of the sites identified were intact, buried subsurface deposits, and the surface material re-identified by Dr. Parker was associated with barnyard fill. The COI also assert that a letter submitted by Robert Geary, which purports to identify waterways that are next to or within the project area, as well as an additional archaeological site that was identified but not reported by Subterra, represents substantial evidence of TCR on site. These assertions, however, are not supported by substantial evidence because they are speculative and lack factual foundation. Per Dr. White, the unrecorded site Mr. Geary refers to is a buried deposit that Dr. White observed in the bank of Burns Valley Creek, 1/8 mile downstream from the Burns Valley Sports Complex property more than 40 years ago, that Dr. White found while working for another archaeologist. Dr. White completed notes and a draft record and gave the documents to the person in charge, but that person didn't complete or file the record since it is not on file. Dr. White mentioned this to Mr. Geary last year, and Dr. White has agreed to track down and record the site as time permits. However, the site was not contained in the Burns Valley Sports Complex project area, so there was no obligation to record it at that time. Further, most of Mr. Geary's concerns appear to be addressed in Dr. White's report for the project site and may have been written before reading Dr. White's final report. Skip down a little bit here. The next paragraph, with regards to any potential impacts that the project may have on Clearlake Hitchee habitat, the project does not propose impacts to the nearby Burns Valley Creek or the riparian corridor for the creek. Now, there are numerous mitigation measures. I won't go read all of them on the next few pages. The mitigation measures that were agreed to originally, and then if you get to page 10, there were additional mitigation measures that were added after consultation with the tribe. It was the city's opinion that these were not needed to reduce the impacts to less than significant. In other words, that the impacts were already less than significant, but these were added to further show good faith consultation with the COI. And again, I won't go through all of the mitigation measures unless you want to, but okay, so then, as I mentioned, and as counsel for the COI mentioned, there were a number of other issues that were raised separate from tribal cultural resources. I just want to make clear that we did go through each of those items that were raised in their appeal letter and address them. And I can just briefly touch on them. Air quality significance, the appeal letter asserted that the MND fails to explain why it is appropriate to rely on the Bay Area Air Quality Management District guidelines when the project is located in Lake County. The response will be, among other things, as indicated on page 22 of the MND, the Lake County Air Quality Management District does not have an air quality management plan. Thus, it refers to the Bay Area Air Quality Management District guidelines to evaluate thresholds of significance for air quality impacts. And again, there's additional mitigation measures listed as to the air impacts. Another issue that was raised in the appeal letter was lighting impacts of the project on neighbors. And I want to point out that the city municipal code contains provisions for night sky preservation that directly address and are designed to prevent glare and obtrusive lighting. There are standards for outdoor sports fields and maximum light intensity on residential sites. And for residential sites, the maximum light intensity shall not exceed the 10-foot candles when measured at finished grade. So there was mitigation, and there are existing laws that address lighting impacts. Another issue that was raised was noise impacts from speakers. And wanted to point out that the noise study that was done in the MND explicitly discusses the proposed project's sports complex and any potential impact noise from events that the project may have on nearby residents. And that it did take into account the potential loudspeakers. There's another issue that was raised was the impacts of using artificial turf on the project for the soccer field or for the sports fields, including potential increases in water usage or drainage or irrigation. And there's some citations to an entity called the Synthetic Turf Council that the appeal letter raises. There's additional information that was found from the Synthetic Turf Council that says that water use actually decreases via use of synthetic turf fields, and that they do not cause hazards to health or the environment. Also, the project would be required to obtain a national pollutant discharge limit. The city will obtain a national pollutant discharge elimination system general permit for discharges of stormwater runoff associated with construction activity, and will prepare and implement a stormwater pollution prevention plan before construction on the project begins, which would address concerns about runoff. There was another issue that was raised as to whether the project adequately analyzed impacts on water supply. There's an affirmative statement from the Highland Mutual Water Company saying that they have capacity to serve the project. There was a concern about hazardous materials on the project site. The MND does talk about how the proposed project would not be a large quantity user of hazardous materials. Only small quantities would routinely be used, such as fertilizers or herbicides and pesticides. There was a concern raised about whether the bats, the lights on the sports field might impact bats. Biologists addressed this via mitigation measures, that there would be a qualified biologist to survey all suitable roosting habitat within the project area, and a bat management plan would be prepared to make sure there were no significant impacts on bats. Another issue that was raised was wildlife migration impacts, and the MND talks about how under existing conditions, the site provides limited migratory opportunities for terrestrial wildlife, so that impact would be less than significant. Another concern was raised about agricultural impacts. The site is zoned mixed use and does not allow agricultural uses. One more concern was raised in the appeal about traffic impacts and whether they were fully analyzed, and wanted to point out that there will be that the traffic impact did take into account all of the uses that would be part of the corporation yard, which would could potentially include maintenance crews, electric utility maintenance crews, street maintenance crews, et cetera. And then there was finally concern, oh, sorry, two more concerns. One was in the appeal about wildfire impacts, questioning whether the site was whether the site was at risk of wildfire. I wanted to clarify that the project is not within a known fire hazard zone. It's determined by the Office of the State Fire Marshal and will not substantially impair an adopted emergency plan. Then the other issue that was mentioned in the appeal letter was whether NEPA needs to be met. That's the National Environmental Policy Act. That is a federal corollary to CEQA. The city is not subject to it. And NEPA does, although federal funding may or may not be applied to this project, it would not be the city's role to conduct the NEPA review. So that's the lengthy report, but I'm happy to answer questions. Try to just get through it as quickly as possible.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Floor.
That's all unless you have a question. So it would just be appropriate to turn it back over to the COI for 5-minute rebuttal.
Yes, sir.
When you're ready.
Any questions of staff at this time? Council members? At this point, it would be appropriate for the COI's 5-minute rebuttal. Five-minute rebuttal. Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, again, William Chisholm, on behalf of, excuse me, on behalf of the Koi Nation, and thank you again for the opportunity to provide this brief rebuttal. As I think you've seen, we've received this evening 41 pages of some new materials, both legal analysis, changes to the MND. It's a little hard to completely comment upon those, and so that would be one point we would ask is to renew the request of Ms. Roberson that this be continued to allow for a full analysis of these new materials, including whether or not the new materials presented in the MND require recirculation of the MND. which would be a whole other issue, which we haven't had a chance, obviously, to look at since that was just made this evening, and there may well be that requirement. We would submit that in terms of the consultation that the council look at and consider the city's own consultation guidelines and whether those have been met. There's been nothing that's been said this evening that we think satisfy even the city's own requirements, and that material is within the record. I think it is important to note, as Dr. White has said, there is a distinction between historic, scientific, heritage resources and tribal cultural resources. Dr. White has commented extensively on historic heritage resources, which we appreciate. There's a distinction, though, between the tribal cultural resources. And even as Dr. White admitted, that is not an area that really he has the expertise on. That is an area which Mr. Gary has the expertise on. And that's been recognized by the state legislature. Mr. Gary has testified before you this evening, this afternoon, that there are tribal cultural resources on the site, even within the series of fills and redeposits, that should and really must be considered in terms of the need for additional mitigation, the need for specifically monitoring and protocols. We appreciate the city has adopted protocols and has provided for mitigation on the 2 sites that have been identified by Dr. White. We're not ignoring that. We certainly appreciate that. But unfortunately, the site's bigger. The project site is bigger than those 2 sites. And the larger issue needs to be considered. It's even more so troubling when within the past couple of weeks, there have been disking of the site, including areas that are within these 2 specific sites identified by Dr. White, included within the mitigation and monitoring plan. There was site disturbing activity occurring within those where the city did not file or follow its own consultation and mitigation guidelines and protocols. So it's vital that there be further consultation to make sure that the TCR is protected. The tribe is not against the project. It's not asking that the project go away. It's not asking that the site be fenced off and put off limits for always and ever. You've heard members of the tribe talk about how they look forward to the site. They look forward to being there. There's the need for the recreation site. However, it's also just as important that the rules of CEQA be followed, that there be sufficient mitigation, monitoring, consultation. That can occur. That has started. And if it's continued, it's likely to occur. As the former planning commissioner stated, there are ways to deal with things short of litigation, ways to deal with things short of EIRs. We ask that that be given another further opportunity to get this done for the betterment of the community. That is what we ask. We're not asking, say, we want litigation. We're not saying we want an EIR. That's certainly an option. But the better option is, let's continue this. Give us a chance to look over what was presented today. And let's give a chance for dialogue to continue so that we can work together and make this project a reality, while at the same time acknowledging and respecting the TCRs that are on site, whether they be there in the ground, whether they be there from redeposits. From the tribal perspective, that's not the consideration. The tribal one, how they got there, whether they're in the ground, redeposit or whatnot. But let's work to address those. So that would be our preference. Let's continue this. Let's get this resolved. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, sir. With that, I'd like to have a motion to close the public hearing for deliberation.
I'll move that we close the public hearing.
Second. I have a motion by Councilmember Slotin and a second by Councilmember Overton to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Passes unanimously. At this time, any comment or questions from the council members or direction? Councilmember Overton, Councilmember Kramer.
Well, a couple things. Mr. Gary, in your comments, I don't know, about 2 hours or so ago, you were talking about doing a survey for free for us because you you're concerned about this additional area. Dr. White has identified scientifically 2 sites, and we've already, I think the city has already agreed in MND to monitor, to have you monitor those sites. I understand your concerns on a tribal cultural resource basis, which goes beyond, I still don't, you mentioned substantial evidence, but you never really quantified what that is to me. But that aside, would you be willing to provide monitors at your cost on the rest of the site? And then we'll pay for the monitors. This is just my question and not, I'm only one of 5 here. But that may go a ways to help us get through this thing.
So rather than asking or posing a question to Mr. Gary as a
Well,
prior
to
witness,
Mr. Beltran probably is
to the COA.
tribal chairman.
To let the record reflect that Mr. Beltran of the COI did answer in the affirmative that they would consider that at their cost. But for now, for our deliberations, Mr. Kramer, any other comments?
Well, I tend to agree that there's a heck of a lot of new information here that I'd could maybe take a little more time to absorb. That
Okay.
I would not be against a continuance of a week or whatever it takes to get through that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kramer.
By the way, Mr. Gary, I did play baseball and football with some of your relatives.
Mr. Slotin.
I've been looking through the draft, the red line draft that was provided by the COI attorney. And there seem to be a lot of things that seems kind of more wording than actually substance. But the part that the city cannot do, in my opinion, is to take control away from the city and let the tribe be the deciding factor. I don't think we can agree on that ever. So if there are some there's I kind of went through this and said, yeah, no problem, no. When we lose control of the project, that we cannot do. For the rest, I think there might be some areas that we can look through these red line things and come to a conclusion and move forward. But like I said, the one part that I feel we cannot do is have no control over. It's our project, it's our money. Although Mr. Beltran is graciously provide some additional funds to do monitoring on the rest of the site. That's the only really comment I have. And there are some other things that kind of bother me, but I don't want to talk about it today. Thanks.
Ms. Overton.
Okay, so the biggest thing about this whole project has been the monitoring. We have just got approval that they will absorb that portion of the monitoring that we were not going to pay for. So now what is the problem? Nothing?
I think
That kind of takes, well, we can't be, we know that that's not going to happen. Some rewording in some of the documentation is from what I can see here, they want some rewording, and I agree, we cannot let control go away from the city. So some rewording, is there something in here that you think you can reword? Because a lot of it is outside of a few things you've mentioned and the monitoring. So, I mean, that was the biggest thing here. So it seems like we've kind of come to the conclusion the monitoring is going to be covered. So with what we're going to automatically pay for and what they've offered to do. So that's not a problem anymore. So it's just some wording. So
Well,
It's just
and
some wording, correct? It's just some wording now in the proposal. I mean, we're definitely not going to let loose of the control. I mean, we can't, it's public funds going into it. We can't let loose of the control. That's a no brainer, but some of the wording in here, if it needed to be reworded a little differently. I mean, I don't really see a problem with some of that. So how do we want to go about this, I guess, is more the.
okay, Mr. Flora, Mr. Jones, I never saw anything really compelling that would take as lead agency from the city or was requested of the Khoi Nation. Did I miss something, or is that your interpretation?
No, I think there was some language about the lead agency maybe
Okay.
being removed. And so that is, I think, important language. I think Councilwoman Overton's point about the ground
Okay,
disturbance and monitoring is.
I haven't had a
is
chance to
huge.
dig through all this that we just received. at
But
the-
there was some other language,
Okay.
I think, that we would want to work on with
Thank you.
regard to lead agency role.
Thank you. Mr. Vice Mayor, any comments?
So just so I'm clear with some of the mitigation measures, at this point, no cultural soil will be removed from the site, correct?
That's what the mitigation measures that were approved by the planning commission say.
And then some of the surface artifacts scatter that has potentially been identified here, that doesn't rise to the level of CEQA and require us to have mitigation measures for that. That's my
We
understanding.
don't
correct?
believe so.
Okay. The forgive me, let me pull this up. The tribal consultation standards, operating procedures and manual that we approved last month. In there, it included a paragraph near the end that says, in the event that the city receives a request for tribal monitoring after project approval, I'll skip ahead. Which may be just before or during construction, when tribal monitoring was not a mitigation measure as a condition of approval, the city shall not pay for tribal monitoring. However, the city will consider requests from interested tribes and to visit the project site, observe project activities on a voluntary basis, as long as the appropriate safety measures and a waiver of liability. Is that included in the mitigation measures at this point?
Part of our.
It's not. I mean, I think if this is the direction the council wants to go, we would probably come up with some language to specify
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I mean, that's speaking, I think, to a slightly different situation, but the overall intent behind it is the same as well.
Well, yeah, I think it goes back to the intent here. I believe the city has taken pretty significant steps here to mitigate what we believe is known. There is a level of unknown here, and I'm incredibly sensitive to that. And I think if there is an opportunity for folks to participate and address some of this surface scatter in a way that the city can control safely, then I would be very much for that.
I guess at this point in time, since we seem like we've, what would be if we approve?
If you could just speak a little better in the
Okay.
mic.
If
Thanks.
we approve this, can you work with the wording? Or is that something that we need to come back to later? In other
Well, I
words,
mean,
this is-
that's entirely up to the council. I mean, there's obviously an array of options, but the tribe did say that the monitoring was the important thing.
taking
So
care of.
we could, ask them, but the sort of interpretation would be that if that's agreed upon to provide monitoring at their expense on the areas outside what we've determined to be sensitive, that part's covered. I don't know how important the other things are. I guess it's up to your determination on whether the existing mitigation measures with the language that's been proposed, in addition to the idea that Councilmember Kramer brought up, about adding that additional sort of voluntary monitoring, whether it meets the standard. And if you think that additional language changes are necessary in those mitigation measures to reduce some of those impacts to less than significant, then we could go through and look at those. So I guess my point is we could set those aside and approve the project. You could ask us to go through those now and say which ones we would recommend approving or not approving. You could continue it to a later time and have that done in the interim.
Ask a question of Mr. Beltran, or
Question
I'm
for the
sorry.
mayor, I think, but.
Mayor, may I?
Well, Mr. Beltran, would you mind approaching the microphone so we can have it recorded? Thank you, sir. I appreciate your help.
Hello, my name is Darren Beltran, tribal chairman,
Thank you for
coordination in
being
Northern
here, sir.
California. Thank you for having me,
Mr. Beltran, with
sir.
what you've agreed upon doing monitoring on the areas that you consider tribal cultural resources that even you've agreed, I believe, that you'll do the monitoring at your cost. What other things in here are in your mind things that still need to be agreed upon? Give me some idea,
As far as
whether
future,
for this project.
oh, for this project,
So, because we're looking at either denying that appeal or approving it or come up with something. But if we can come to an agreement tonight, I'd say here another hour or two.
Me too. I think at the bottom line is all we ever wanted to is be the sensitivity of this area is so significant to us.
Sure. I
That
understand
our
that.
presence, and you can have, I've been in construction and, you have back operators that, they're trying to avoid utilities that could kill people, kill themselves, with gas and electric. And even the best operators need a spotter. They all need spotters. And in essence, that's what we're going to be when it comes to this area over here. And all we want is to be included in the process. And that, if it came to it, my the vice chair and myself talked about this, Adina Beltran, we talked about if it came to it, because we're not a rich tribe, we're not rolling in money. So we would make the sacrifice to.
Contrary to what you might think, neither are we.
Yeah, I understand that. See, that's the whole, I'm glad you said that. That's the most important part of this whole process. It's like all this money is being spent. There's not agreeing or reaching that middle ground when I'm not going to say it's simple to me because it's not, but I think our ask was, was mentioned before that, you guys went above and beyond this project than any other project as far as mitigation and stuff like that. And first thing came to my mind was, well, that's a shame because it's a good thing and it's a thing of being not inclusive in years past. Now we're here. And, yes, this whole area has been uprooted, overturned for 100 years, it sounds like,
Probably several hundreds.
Yeah, but oral history, the tribe, the elders that talk to us over the time of areas that are significant to us. Those elders are no longer here now. The only thing we have is oral history. Oral history is just as important as written history because the writing was not around thousands of years ago in the whole world. So you had oral history. So that oral history came down. And so there's sites here, there's practices here, there's religious sites that we know about that, archaeologists may not know about, anthropologists may not know about, but they're there. And, all we want to do is be inclusive in the process to protect whatever gets unearthed. Because it's like my brother said before, we want nothing to come up because that's, that would be a decimation.
We're in total agreement there.
So with that said, so we came to the conclusion, it's like, what, if we got to pay for this monitoring for this certain area, we'll do it. But we want to make sure that this is not going to be looked at as a status quo. We could do this all the time because we can't. We don't have the funds for it. And you guys don't have the funds for it. But the longer we're, we're going back and forth,
We're spending money we both
it's
don't
money that
have.
we both could
Use
not
use
better
better
use in a
somewhere
better
else.
way. And we've had meetings with you guys before and saying that we're pro development. And we're willing to, work with the city as much as we can, because with a true working partnership. That's what we're looking at. And this could be the start of it, or we could just keep butting heads. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that,
Yeah.
but we're
So-
not going anywhere.
So can we come to an agreement tonight?
Can we just say as long as
We'll
we're
try,
doing monitoring, let's just pass this and. get
Absolutely. I'd
moving
love
on?
to.
Okay, Mr. Slotin.
I originally, you asked to have the project have your name on it, and my first reaction was, usually it would be a sports complex named after you. But you're doing that now by doing the tribal monitoring on the area that is not within the sensitive area that we kind of all know. So I'm cool with that. And I looked at so that's condition 7, 8, 9. I mean, that's. I'm good with that. I don't know.
I think we've covered everything.
Go ahead. Alan.
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about the naming, I mean,
No, let's not do that.
what it says is that we will bring that back for discussion. The tribe had originally requested that the planning commission consider that, and staff said that we didn't think it was appropriate for the planning commission to make that decision. That was something for the
Anyway,
council, so.
No.
You're giving some, so we want to do this.
Well, I appreciate
Let's
that.
not get into
Well, Mr. Beltran, I again want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody who came today and presented very compelling information. I couldn't agree more that once a tribal cultural resource is lost, it's lost forever. That's true in any historical issue. So, and we have to value that. Because too much has been destroyed already. We can't undo that, but we can be careful moving forward.
That's true.
Any other comments? Mr. Kramer,
Again, are there any others?
turn your mic on.
My mic is on. I'm just not leaning in. Again, what are the other points that we need to agree on so we can go forward and come up with and go forward?
You have a hand behind you, Mr. Beltran, you might want to address.
Yeah.
Your attorney's telling you,
Yeah.
he's gonna put a muzzle on you, I think.
Mrs. Robertson brought up a good subject. Fight shares not here. We operate obviously as a
Yeah,
government.
council.
My brother's out of town and just me and the secretary. So it'd be nice because he's gonna return either tomorrow or Friday. And if we can get together and, come to a conclusion, we can get back to you in speedy time.
We want to
And
continue.
review the documents that Mr. White has submitted that I didn't get. So it'd be nice to look through that as well.
I think those are reasonable issues. Any other comment by council?
I would agree that we continue this for a week or do our next council meeting,
Okay.
whichever makes most sense.
Well, the next council meeting is next Thursday, right?
Yeah, so it's next week.
Does that
Next
afford you
week from
enough
today.
time, Mr. Beltran?
Absolutely.
Mr.
Absolutely.
Jones, does that afford us enough time for
It
public
does.
notice?
What you did close the public hearing. What we would probably recommend doing is reopening the public hearing, extending the meeting to a date certain, which would be next Thursday's meeting, with the hope that in the meantime, we'd have worked it out.
Oh, I so
Appreciate your-
motion to open up the public hearing.
Ms. Overton, do you have a motion?
I have a motion to open up the public hearing again.
I second that.
And
So I have a motion to reopen the public hearing. Is that appropriate?
Specifically, the appropriate motion would be to continue the. public
Continue the hearing.
Until,
since he
The
closed it, don't we
15th
have
at
to
6
reopen
p.m.
it still?
No, we
Yeah,
just can motion to
Okay,
continue.
So motion to continue the public hearing until Thursday, June, what's the date?
Second that.
15th
15th
at 6 p.m.
at 6 PM
In these chambers.
Thank you.
in the chamber.
So I have a motion by Councilmember Overton, a second by Councilmember Kramer,
It's done.
and the attorney still wants to speak.
It's done.
we would welcome a constructive suggestion.
I'll give her the podium.
It better be.
Oh, you can stay there.
You have a real asset in Lisa Westwood. All parties trust her. And I would strongly encourage you to point her as a go-between for the next couple weeks because. or
No, we're
couple
just going till
days.
next
Thank you.
Thursday. Is that
Thursday.
necessary?
Next
Yes.
Thursday, we're done.
Got
Yeah,
it.
we're just changing some wording, so
Got
I
it.
don't think
So-
that's really necessary.
I respect what Chairman Beltran is saying. We will take our direction from the tribal council. But there are a few tricky, sticky issues to work out kind of quickly. And so in order to get it done quickly, you might consider having Lisa help us do that.
See that.
That's up to us, I guess.
Yeah. Appreciate your recommendation. We'll take it under consideration.
Well, I would just love
Mr.
the council
Flora?
know, since that was brought up, that the existing mitigation measures were developed by Ms. Westwood in coordination with the tribe.
So she was the one that developed them in the first place. Okay.
Well, I appreciate Ms. Robinson's comments. Thank you, Mr. Flora. I have a motion. I have a second. Madam Clerk, do you have any questions about that motion? For the record,
No, the record reflects that the motion is to continue the public hearing to June 15th, 23 at 6 PM here in the council chambers.
and do we need a roll call vote or maybe we just vote?
Voice vote is fine.
Voice vote is fine. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes.
We have to get this back to them.
I don't
guys.
even remember what did I get from who.
I very much would like to thank everyone who came. Dr. White, thank you. Appreciate all those who
This is all-
testified.
So this
And
goes
we will
back-
reconvene on this item on Thursday of next week.
Yeah.
Pass down
I-
the books, guys.
The book, the book, the book, the book.
Easy there, tough guy.
And make sure there's none of our stuff isn't there.
No, Russ has got his in hands.
Russ, we need you to take this thing out of there, because this goes back to them.
This goes back to